Every time an economy fails, governments say the same thing. This is not a crisis. This is stability. History tells us something else. Welcome to Wheelixon, where history isn't just remembered, it's used to understand how money, power, and systems quietly break. When people imagine economic failure, they picture chaos, bank runs. But applied financial history shows a far more uncomfortable truth. Most economic failures don't look like failure at all. They are presented as stability, not because leaders are lying in a simple sense, but because modern systems are designed to reframe collapse before admitting it. This is not accidental. It is learned behavior, refined over centuries. Admitting failure destroys authority. If a state announces it cannot pay its soldiers, cannot fund its projects, cannot honor its promises, power evaporates. So failure had to be disguised. The Roman Empire understood this better than most. When Rome began spending more than it could tax or conquer, it did not declare bankruptcy. It debased its currency. Silver coins slowly lost silver content. On paper, the system looked intact. Trade continued. It stabilized, temporarily. Purchasing power declined. Trust eroded and productivity weakened. Rome didn't fall because of one crisis. It survived because failure was spread across generations. That was the first version of the playbook. As states grew more complex, the strategy evolved. In medieval Europe, monarchs faced constant war expenses and weak tax systems. Again, default was unacceptable. So rulers borrowed. They diluted coins. It was survivability. Now fast forward to the modern era, and the same logic remains, only with better language. Today, governments don't debase coins. They manage narratives. Economic failure is no longer called failure. It becomes transition, adjustment, soft landing, temporary imbalance, contained risk. These phrases are not random. They are the modern tools of stabilization. Historically, inflation signaled a clear message. The system was spending more than it could support. In earlier eras, inflation caused panic because it was obvious. Prices rose sharply. Currencies weakened visibly. Modern governments learned to smooth that signal. Inflation is redefined. Certain items are excluded. Methodologies are updated, not to fabricate data, but to prevent reaction. Because reaction destabilizes systems faster than imbalance. Inflation becomes manageable, not alarming. Economic failure becomes price pressure. The same transformation happened with debt. In the past, debt crises ended in default or collapse. Today, debt crises are rebranded as sustainability challenges. Governments roll over obligations, lower real interest rates through inflation. Debt doesn't disappear, it dissolves slowly. The system remains stable. The burden shifts quietly. Failure becomes endurance. This pattern was clearly visible after World War II. Britain emerged victorious, but economically exhausted. Its debt was enormous, its empire shrinking. Instead of default, Britain chose decades of inflation, capital controls, and rationing. Living standards stagnated, but the system survived. Failure was transformed into stability. Japan followed the same path decades later. After its asset bubble burst in the early 1990s, Japan faced massive insolvency. Banks were effectively bankrupt. Debt soared. But Japan did not allow collapse. Losses were absorbed slowly. Banks were supported quietly. Debt expanded indefinitely. The result was not crisis, it was stagnation. Economic failure was stabilized into decades of low growth and low volatility. The system survived. Dynamism did not. The United States refined this approach further. After 2008, collapse was avoided through unprecedented intervention. Banks were rescued. Liquidity flooded markets. Interest rates were suppressed. The economy did not reset. The language shifted quickly. The crisis became contained. The recovery became fragile but improving. Emergency tools became standard policy. Failure was never officially declared. Stability was. When systems fail, governments do not announce it. They absorb it through suppressed rates, through regulatory adjustments. Each tool reduces immediate pain and while increasing long-term fragility. Why does this work? Because people tolerate gradual loss better than sudden shock. History proves this repeatedly. A population will revolt against overnight collapse. It will adapt to slow erosion. Wages lose purchasing power slowly. Opportunities narrow gradually. Living standards decline quietly. There is no single moment to resist. This is not conspiracy. It is behavioral economics applied at scale. The most important stage of the playbook is redefinition. Failure is not denied, it is renamed. Recession becomes slowdown. Crisis becomes stress. Collapse becomes transition. Language shapes perception. Perception stabilizes systems. This is why economic data changes over time, not because numbers are fake, but because truth without context destabilizes confidence. Governments learn which truths can be released safely and which must be delayed. Transparency becomes conditional. Eventually, systems reach a critical phase, the point where stabilization tools lose effectiveness. Interest rates approach zero. Debt expands faster than growth. Interventions become permanent. At this stage, the system is no longer correcting failure. It is managing it. Economic policy shifts from optimization to survival. This is when late-stage stability appears strongest. Markets are calm, volatility is low, crises seem distant, but beneath the surface, flexibility disappears. The system becomes brittle. Any shock requires larger intervention. Any truth requires more distortion. History shows this phase clearly. Before major breakdowns, systems appear calm. The Great Depression followed years of optimism. Currency collapses follow periods of artificial calm. Stability is not health, it is suspension. Eventually, the cost of stabilization exceeds the benefit. Capital flows change direction. At that moment, narratives fail. Reality reasserts itself quickly, and people say, "No one saw this coming," but history disagrees. The playbook was visible. This is why applied financial history matters. It doesn't predict dates, it explains behavior. It shows how systems respond to failure, not with honesty, but with management. Because honesty risks collapse. Management preserves control. Understanding this doesn't mean collapse is inevitable tomorrow. It means systems trade truth for time, and time always has a cost. Economic failure turned into stability does not disappear. It accumulates. Eventually, those costs surface, not dramatically at first, but persistently. This is why modern economies feel functional but strained, why growth exists but feels hollow, why opportunity narrows despite stability. These are not contradictions. Governments don't hide failure because they are malicious. They do it because collapse ends authority. Stability preserves it. That choice defines economic history. Once you understand this pattern, crises stop feeling mysterious. You stop asking, why did this happen? You start asking, how long was this being stabilized? That question reveals more truth than any headline. Applied financial history is not about fear. It is about clarity. It shows that systems don't fail suddenly. They are managed into fragility. And when management finally fails, collapse looks sudden, even though it was decades in the making. If you want to understand money and power beyond headlines, subscribe to Wheelixen.